Well, hello there. Good morning. It's Tuesday, December 17th, and I'm Rob at Developer Dad, and we're building applications in .NET. In particular, I am working on some back-end kind of businessy automation stuff that's going to sit between the online store and my back-end systems to keep customer accounts synchronized and make sure that everybody's got access to the things that they pay for when they go to the shop to sign up for a subscription. And we started in on some of the details of that yesterday, and we're going to continue with that this morning. Now, at the end of the last session, I said I was going to continue working through this stuff, but I was just not in a great space yesterday afternoon mentally, and I decided to take a nap instead. Sometimes self-care trumps work, and so I'm going to get back at it right now. Pardon me. So we are going to, first we need to get the subscription template. Subscription template. Resource, requested SKU. I'm going to change that to SKU template equals await catalog access dot get catalog item async, and it is going to be, let's hide this, boop, action request dot request detail dot subscription SKU. And let's put this down on a new line. And that's going to get tiresome quickly. We've already validated that the request detail is not null at this point. Otherwise, it would have bounced out. So why don't we do this? Excuse me. Copilot, you're silly. Subscription action detail equals, we'll just read that into a variable. And we can use action request at customer profile ID here. We've built that. Okay. And I can just do this. That'll shorten things up nicely for us as we move forward. Now, if SKU template is null, that means we cannot continue. Service error, SKU not found, and I'm using, yeah, that works. It's not found in the catalog, severity error, because we cannot continue with this process. Site is ManageCustomerSubscription async, error kind is SKU not found, and out we go. Just being a little bit defensive about things. And that's the first batch of common stuff that we need. We're going to need the builder response has errors. In order to perform any of the activities that we want to perform, we're going to need to have the customer profile and the template for the subscription that we're going to be working with. And let's just validate that our customer profile is not null. if customer profile is null, profile not found, error severity, yeah. And I believe what it's going to do is it's going to try to find our customer in the local storage. If they can't find that customer, it's going to build a starter profile and then return back to us. But if it can't do that building of the customer profile and come back, we're going to throw an error. So I think we've got some good defense here against things that could possibly go wrong at this stage of the game. So if SKU template is null, we'll bail. If we can neither load nor create a profile for the identified customer, we need to bail now. If we can't load the template for the provided subscription SKU, we cannot continue. Save. All right, so far so good. These next bits, these are going to be distinct for each possible activity that we're going to be performing. And I remember yesterday that I had set up some constants. And I believe I had put those in here. Subscription renewal periods, domain constants, subscription statuses, change kinds. Here we are. So I suppose the next thing that we should validate is that the activity kind, I suppose I should put these not as past tense, but as present tense. Rename, just so that I don't get confused later. Rename this to update. Rename to expire. Rename to cancel. Suspend. And resume. And I'm just going to go ahead and change the actual values to present tense as well. Resume does end with an E. Okay. Excuse me. Update. That's not. Renew. Okay, renew, expire, cancel, suspend, resume. Okay. I should put some semantic, I should put some comments in here at some point. Not gonna really sweat that yet. So let's save that. We're gonna keep that where we've got it. Our managed subscription response, some Boolean, cool. And let's come back to the customer account manager. So our customer profile is here. We've got the action detail. Make sure the activity is one of the known activities that we can perform. Subscription change kinds. Probably going to need to import that namespace. Yep. Dot public static string action detail dot. It probably just guessed at the property name on that incorrectly. Activity name. Oh, nonsense. Need to reference system link. Activity name is not a known subscription activity. All right. And I'm just going to boop that out of here. It's not a known subscription activity, error, unknown activity. Cool. So even more validation code. Builder response has errors. We're going to bounce. This is getting really long and messy. I'm not sure I like this. Not sure I like this at all. Excuse me. Because this is going to make things really, really, really difficult to read and debug later. This is a lot of stuff. I think private system errors list. What's the name of that thing? Service error. Service error. Try get try get change detail. From manage subscription request. Subscription action detail. And this needs to be an out param. Bounce up here, do that. Let's bring these guys down here. There we go. List of service error. Errors equals a new list. Return errors. This will be nullable. That's fine, we'll get to there. Subscription action detail. Is request.request detail. Detail equals action detail. If action detail is null, let's come up here. So if action request is null, I'm not gonna shell that out there down to that validation thing. I am going to instead grab these guys and Visual Studio Code gets really grumpy when I try to pull collapsed bits. So I'm going to cut those guys, bring them down here, paste, and they're going to be riddled with errors. Service error, malformed request, request detail on the and I don't want to use request detail, I want to use the required subscription action detail on the request was null. Malformed request, missing request payload. Here we go, detail is null, return errors. We're not going to return the errors yet. Actually, because it's null, we are. We can't do any further validation. If the request details aren't present, add an error and bail. We can't even validate the rest of the things yet. Without it. Okay. and action detail equals request.request detail. We know the details exist, so we can validate those next, rather than bail for each error. We'll accumulate them. Excuse me. And we got to spell our variable names right. So that's good. Profile is true. Errors dot add. Malformed request payload. That works. And we need to let's set detail to null because it's unusable. Return errors. Error kind malformed payload request payload. Yeah, that works. Errors.add. Errors.add. Change that to action detail. We know action detail is not null. So if the subscription SKU, we can add that. Customers profile ID must be present. The SKU for the subscription must be present. The activity must be both present and well known. Let's trip up to our main thing here. Now, subscription action detail may be null. What we're going to do is var request errors equals try get change details. Detail. We're going to pass in the action request. Cool. Now we can interrogate the request errors and run a null check on the details. Let's grab this guy. We'll just cut him, delete my comment, run back down here. Errors.add. Get rid of that. So these are all fatal stop the process errors. So subscription change kinds, allowed values contains. Okay. All right, I can shrink that up too. What other things can we rework? Can't really rework any of them. But what we'll do is if request errors.any or action detail equals null, and let's just go to the definition on this guy. Okay, so this requires the operation response as the donor. Let's add an overload for this. Public void, we'll just add an overload that accepts an IEnumerable and add those to our errors collection. To do port to system framework repo. Boop. Okay. Now, if action details is still null and we don't have any request errors, something horrible has happened. So I actually want to throw an exception in this case. Before I do that, in .NET, when running a release build, if I've added debug.assert statements, will the application crash for me? Okay, so assert isn't really a valid way of bailing out. Might want to use exceptions or other validation techniques instead of debug.assert. All right, that's fine. It was a thought. Eyeballs. Requesters.any. Is null. Yeah, you know what? That'll do. Copilot added that in for me. And I'm just going to let Copilot be the arbiter here. No, I want some white space between those two conditionals. Boop, boop. All right. And I suppose this is fine. Yeah, that'll have to do. Though I really, hmm. Leave it. Got the subscription template or bail. All right, 5, 6, and 7 are the same for every request. Let's take these on. So save the modified account back to local storage. In order to do that, we need to user account resource equals domain object mapper. We're going to map from our customer profile to our user account resource using the customer profile that we have been building up here, or that we've been operating upon. And var saved resource equals await user account access, save user account async. And I need to change this to save result. If save result dot item 2 is not null, user account save error, and we will return the response. Yeah. Customer should have membership. Okay, that's going to be a fun one. This facility doesn't exist yet. Need to add it to the user identity access service. And then something went wrong and is unrecoverable. Notify an administrator. Possibly roll back the changes made to the payment processor. I'm going to make that no. This rollback process will need to be manual for now. Nothing went wrong. We can just carry on with our lives. Get rid of the logger. Payload equals true. And we can return the result. Excuse me. So if response dot has errors, response dot payload equals false, and we're going to return else response dot payload equals true. Let's not return. Need a way to send an alert to a human here. Okay, that's that. And let's get rid of my hieroglyphics braces. There. All right, what do we want to take on first? So we have saved our user account, post change. Save result item 2, yeah. I think we should put in the reconcile facility because that's something that I've done many times and is not exactly a challenge for me. So we need to come into user identity abstractions and I'm going to add a new class called reconcile memberships request new file again called, and it's going to be a class, reconcile memberships response. New file, class, reconcile memberships, data. Prop, string, user ID, prop, string array, expected group memberships. Expected groups. Save. CTOR, no params, because we're just going to build it manually. User ID equals string empty, array.empty string, and that's that. And this doesn't need to be an entity thing. This isn't really a domain entity. This is just a mechanic of our system. Our response is going to inherit from operation response of type nullable Boolean. Yep, cool. That's all we need there. And then I need reconcile memberships request is going to be operation request of type reconcile memberships data. This is not a double thingy. Let's satisfy the complaint code. Is that operation name? Workload name. The operation name is operation name, because I like to have these things as constants, even if they're just private constants within the class. Private const string. Reconcile authorization groups. There we go. That works. Save that. Save that. Excuse me. Var reconcile groups request equals new reconcile memberships request Copilot's really eager, but it's a little too quick on the draw sometimes. I need to pass the workload name and some data. So we're going to go with action request dot workload name and reconcile data. Var reconcile data equals new reconcile membership data, profile ID, that's user ID, customer profile dot user ID, and groups equals subscription template. Where's my template? Excuse me. SKU template. Gotta spell stuff right. Dot confers membership in. And I'm going to need to make sure I get those values set up correctly before too much longer. Actually, before I run this code. And I need to add task, reconcile membership response, reconcile user memberships async. And this accepts a reconcile memberships request. Beautiful. Save. All right, customer profile. Now, the customer profile user ID, that is absolutely, we know that's going to be the right one, but let's alter this just a scooch. Customer profile. I'm going to add an internal class or an internal thing, internal string, get user ID for vendor, string vendor name, string ID is is null. And it can't be an ID question mark. My brain's getting away from me here. Return ID. ID equals external IDs dot first or default E dot vendor equals vendor name. Excuse me. Dot ID of vendor. There we go. Get user ID for vendor. Now come back out to the account manager and say dot get user ID for vendor. And I'm going to say user identity access dot vendor name. Var user ID identity ID equals that user identity ID if user identity ID equals null, has no identity ID, has no ID in the identity service. Something really, really happened to get to this edge case. And yeah, I'm going to leave the Greeked out curse word in here. Because if we get this far and the user identity or the user's ID within the identity service, basically Microsoft Entra, doesn't exist, something really, really effed up has happened to get us to this point. And we need to basically just bail out of the process altogether. And we know at this point that the user identity ID absolutely exists. Because otherwise, Elvis is left. Elvis is going to leave the building. In fact, this really needs to happen when we go get our customer profile. So let's cut this and run it right here. So if the customer profile is null, we're out of here. We got to pull in the user identity ID, or the customer's ID at the identity service. And if we can't get it, there's no sense carrying on. So we'll just do a little bit of defensive programming up here. Response.payload. Well, payload is going to be false. No, it's not going to be implicitly false because it's a nullable Boolean. And that's actually a change that I need to make all throughout this stuff. Save. Response.payload Boolean. False. You silly goose. And hey, I got a new follower. How's it going, Ivan Ulus? Request errors. Let's just set them. Payload is false. And finally, response.payload is false. Okay, so we've got our profile. Build a response.payload. Customer profile is null. If we can't pull the user identity ID, okay. And var reconcile result equals, well, we can't do that yet because, oh no, we can. Derp. I'll be okay, I promise. We've got this reconcile user memberships async. Await reconcile user memberships async. Very good. Reconcile groups request. We've got that. Right now, that's going to throw a not implemented exception. As a matter of fact, right now, the application won't even compile. But if reconcile result has errors, let's just do that. We'll propagate. Response payload is false. Return response. Okay. We're not actually going to return from here because we're in the aftermath. And I may either set an alert for a human being here or in the API. I haven't decided yet, like in the code that forms the API eventually. I really don't want to have to build a notification component at this stage of the game. But if I do, I'll just put it over in the system framework repository as well. Because this is an example of needing what I call a side effecting process. And if I'm going to send an alert to a human here, I need to make sure that I can just trigger that action, let it run asynchronously, almost a fire and forget type thing, but not really, and carry on with what I'm doing. Excuse me. So response payload is true, and blah, 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 blah. Off we go. So otherwise, reconcile result has errors. Otherwise, it's just going to be fine. It'll be true. And we can carry on. And I think this is a good place to pause for now. And then come back to this in the afternoon. I may actually implement the reconcile activity between now and this afternoon, so that when we come back, we can actually dive into steps 3 and 4, which is where the really interesting stuff is going to happen. If I do forge ahead and get this implemented, I'll talk through what I did in the next session. But I don't think there's really much need for you guys to watch me write that MS graph code. I'll just do a quick review and talk through of it when I come back. So I'm going to thank you all for joining me, and I'll be back in a couple of hours, and we'll pick up where we left off and start talking about how we're going to implement all of these different kinds of subscription change actions. I think it's a good excuse to play around with maybe a strategy pattern. We'll see. We'll see what kind of design I land on for that internal engine. So thanks for hanging out. Have yourselves a good rest of your morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are on this Tuesday, Wednesday. And I'll see you next time. Happy coding.